When someone shows up to church or a church event for the first time, it can feel like the beginning of a journey, like someone has taken their first step with your church. And for some, it might be. But more and more in today's digital world, showing up is actually the endpoint of another journey they've already been on, potentially for weeks, months, or even longer. Your job title or responsibilities might be or include things like communications director or social media maven, or even just the marketing department. But on today's episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we're talking about a title we all share, whether we realize it or not, and that is Tour Guide on the Great Engagement Journey. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and I'm old enough to have spent time driving in the era between the availability of the internet at home and the invention of the smartphone. So there was a time when, while I had a glove box full of paper maps, if I knew where I wanted to go ahead of time, I would print out those turn-by-turn directions from MapQuest. As long as I had all the pages and kept them in order, the steps would guide me to my destination. But every once in a while, I'd accidentally leave a page on the printer or the stack somehow got out of order, and suddenly the journey got a whole lot more challenging. At this point, I had two options: put in the effort myself to figure it out and keep going, or just turn around and head back home. Chances are pretty good that your church has a journey charted out for how a visitor gets connected to your church and eventually becomes a member who's active in mission and ministry. It's probably called something like the discipleship path. You have welcome letters or emails, and perhaps you even give them a gift like a coffee mug. Shortly after that, they'll receive an invitation to an info session or a new member class. Completing that step leads to a prompt for baptism and or membership. And here the journey may end, or they may transition into a new journey that helps them get active in small groups, volunteering, serving, or even leadership development. But as we noted in the intro, this is increasingly not the first journey someone goes on with your church. Chances are good, and even with someone who's a lifelong United Methodist and has simply moved to your area, unless they're picking your church because it's the closest to their house, their first engagement with your church is not at the literal physical front door, but online. And especially for everyone else who has no reason to be predisposed to connect with your specific church, a big part of our job in church marketing and communications is to guide people on what I'm calling the engagement journey. Now, I say I'm calling it the engagement journey because it's really an adaptation of the marketing concept known as the buyer's journey or the customer's journey. And of course, those people we connect with in the church are not buyers, they're not customers, but the overarching general steps are very much the same. Because at the end of the day, it's about building a relationship, whether it's with a company and its customers or a church and its community. We need to be as intentional with understanding and developing this journey as we are with things like our discipleship path, because that process is a natural progression. If we leave steps out and people don't know where to go next, the confusion only introduces friction and makes it much more likely for people to abandon the journey. Going back to that analogy of using printed directions, if I was missing a page or they were out of order, that burden was on me to figure out where to go next. I mean, I could reorder the pages or pull out my paper map. I could ask for directions or look for signs, but that's all extra effort. And it's only really worth it if I cared deeply about where I was going or the destination was specific or unique. If there were other easier options along the way, I might end up there. Or if I didn't care that much or decided I could go another day, I might just abandon the journey altogether and go home. Well, as much as we may want our churches to be specific, unique places that we hope people are motivated to connect with, the truth is that friction and extra effort, especially online, is a journey killer. There's a metric called shopping cart abandonment rate. It measures how often people put items in their shopping cart and then never actually complete the transaction. Shopify cited research done by the Baymard Institute in 2021, and it showed that 70% of shopping carts were abandoned on the desktop, and the rate was over 80% when you look at mobile and tablet. No wonder Amazon developed that one-click purchasing method and protected the patent on it as long as possible. The more steps, the more confusion, the less direction we get, the more friction in the process, the less likely we are to finish that process. Now, before we break down the buyer's journey and adapt it as the engagement journey, I want to make one small but important distinction. And that's the difference between the buyer's journey and another concept you may have heard of, the marketing or sales funnel. Now, they are very similar, and it's easy to get the two confused because they both ultimately seem to have the same endpoint: getting someone to buy your product or service, or in our case, engage with your church. But the distinction between the two is important and may end up being the difference, especially in the context of the kinds of relationships we are seeking to build. The difference is all about perspective, specifically, whose perspective is shaping the path. In the marketing and sales funnel, the journey is viewed from the organization's point of view. This is the path we want people to walk down. For example, a brand may get you to see an ad and then click through to watch a video, and then click a link in the video description to get a free resource. And there you might have to input your email to get that free resource. And then they'll follow up with an email series that ultimately ends with a sales pitch. And this is called a funnel because each step along the way, there are people who are going to drop out of the path. So each successive step reaches a smaller and smaller audience. Now, a church can design an engagement funnel using all the same steps: see an ad, click through to a video, maybe a devotion or a sermon clip, click through to sign up with your email address to get more videos, an ebook, or perhaps an email devotion course or series. And those can end with a pitch like, "Want more? Join us at church, in person or online, Sundays at whatever time." The buyer's journey, on the other hand, breaks down the journey from the buyer, customer, or community member's perspective. And more often than not, that journey is about solving a problem. And so we can create a great funnel with what seems like logical steps to us, gently nudging someone toward becoming a customer or engaging with our church. But if those steps don't help people solve the problems they have, and ultimately don't help them walk through the process of problem solving, they have no reason to keep going. However, if the brand or church demonstrates that they understand the issue or problem and serves as a guide through the problem solving journey, it builds the kind of trust that keeps people engaged. In a way, this is the heart behind the story brand framework developed and made famous by Donald Miller. When brands or churches think they are the hero and try to tell their own story and solve their own problems, customers and community members have little reason to want to walk with you. But if you view the people we're trying to reach as the heroes of their own stories, and see ourselves as the Obi-Wan Kenobi who's there to help guide and resource the hero to overcome their obstacles, we end up earning the kind of trust that leads to connection and influence. Okay, let's break down the buyer's journey. According to marketing software developer HubSpot, the journey has three primary parts: awareness, consideration, and decision. And again, remember, this is about the buyer's perspective and problem solving. So, awareness is not actually awareness of the brand, but rather awareness and understanding of the problem. What do I need to do? What do I need to improve? What do I need to start or stop? What do I need to know more about? What actually isn't that important or is a sign of a different or deeper problem? My wife and I just became homeowners last summer. And let me tell you, when you suddenly become responsible for all of the maintenance rather than having a landlord to call, you find yourself in this stage a lot. And the brands, blogs, stores, and salespeople that helped me understand the problem and not just jumped to the sales pitch, they're the ones that earned my trust. The consideration stage is all about options. You understand the problem, but now you need to know what tools and solutions are available. Do you fix what's broken or just replace it? Do you buy tools you can use or do you outsource the problem? Do you assemble lots of parts or go with an all in one solution? Or, hey, let's go even simpler. You need something to put on your feet. Are you going to get tennis shoes, boots, or sandals? Which of these work in formal settings versus informal settings? Are any acceptable in both? So you see, we aren't talking about things like price or features quite yet, but we're understanding the range of solutions. Those details come in the final stage of the buyer's journey, the decision stage. This includes things like price, specs, data, reviews, walkthroughs or product demos, and so on. These are the details someone needs to actually make their decision. Now, what does this look like adapted to the church and our mission to engage people and make disciples? Remember, awareness, consideration, decision is essentially the journey through problem, solutions, and details. What kinds of problems do people have that we might be able to help them navigate? Tons, right? I mean, there are problems that just about everyone faces. Things like meaning and purpose. Why are we here? Understanding suffering in our personal life or in the world. Then, of course, there are problems that are specific to certain groups, like parenting issues or questions about marriage, living with illness, or taking care of our mental health. And how about being a good steward of the resources that God has blessed us with? This is where knowledge of your community matters. If you're going to reach your community, you can't just design an engagement journey for an abstract, unknown person. You can't try to help people solve problems they don't have or don't feel like they have. But if you know what the people in your community are actually working through, what questions they're asking, what problems they're seeking to solve, you can design a pathway. And again, stay focused on the perspective of the people you're trying to connect with. The goal is not ultimately to get them to connect with your church, but to help them solve their problem. I know this sounds counterintuitive, but people can smell ulterior motives from a mile away. At the same time, seek to help people with problems that your church can actually help them solve. When you combine the trust you build through the engagement journey with the real benefits of what your church can offer, you significantly increase the chances of someone choosing to engage with you at the end of that process. Now, once you've mapped out the problem and what people need and want to know, you've mapped out potential solutions and you've identified what your church has to offer, you can start designing and curating the pieces of content or the experiences for each step. So, for example, let's say you're wanting to tackle the issue of loneliness, and your church had an excellent sermon or sermon series on community or making friendships as an adult. The answer is not to post the full sermon. But can you clip 30 to 90 seconds, a part of that sermon where the preacher eloquently described how hard it is to make friends as an adult? Was there a section where the preacher listed the primary roadblocks in a way that was easy to understand and memorable? Did they tell a funny story that also really hit home? These would be excellent clips for the awareness stage. When you get to the consideration stage, this is where you might create a blog post or a PDF resource or even more videos that let people know what's going on in your community. Free or affordable events or places where you can get out and meet people. And of course, an event at your church or putting on a small group that's low pressure and open to anyone, these would be great things to include. At the decision stage, you make those details of what your church is offering more readily available, more upfront. You talk about things like locations, dates, times, costs, registration links. Now, there are three primary ways where this journey can break down. First, you unintentionally shift your focus from what the community wants or needs to what you as an organization want or need. Let's say you've been assigned the task of promoting a parenting workshop that's coming up, and you design a flow that's ultimately just about getting people to sign up. Well, that's your problem. What you should do rather is identify the problem this workshop can solve for actual parents in your community and work on designing a pathway that guides parents to these resources so that they want to register at the end so you can help them solve their problem. Second, you don't have content for all three stages. The biggest problem most churches have when they try to reach people online is that every post is pretty much just an announcement for an event or a gathering. That's decision stage stuff. Without the first two steps, people are far less likely to care about your event. You haven't built trust, and they may not even recognize the problem you're trying to solve. The other big temptation may be to jump over step two. You create compelling content that can tap into people's sense of their problem, but then you immediately jump to the details. If you're experiencing this problem, be sure to join us Sunday at 11 a.m. Well, why? What solution are you offering, and why should they choose that solution over another one? The third and final point of breakdown is not providing that gentle nudge or even a direct call to action to move someone from one stage to the next. Don't leave them hanging. Don't leave them guessing what to do next. Invite them to take the next step. And if you're focused on their journey and you understand it, then you truly are asking them to take the next step, not a giant leap. The thing you invite them to do should seem totally natural and, at least to a degree, comfortable based on where they are in the process. To liken it to the discipleship pathway, it's why you invite a visitor to an info session and not immediately to join the church. So it may be, if you like this clip, click here for a PDF outlining the main points. Or want to go deeper? Click here to listen to the full sermon. And if, like me, you're not super comfortable self promoting, you're not super comfortable with direct calls to action, Just watch a couple YouTube videos that feature people talking directly to the camera. I guarantee you, anyone with even a moderate following specifically asks you to like, subscribe, and even turn on notifications. It's just a common part of online content these days, and that's because research shows it works. Channels that ask for subscriptions see a higher conversion rate than those who don't. Now, to close, let's talk about rolling this engagement journey out. Now, you certainly can create a campaign. You pick a problem that you specifically want to focus on, either something you just happen to pick or because you have a specific event or a specific resource that you've created or that you have coming up. You would start with the awareness content, either organically or you can spend some money to boost posts or run ads on the platform of your choice. And because people may be ready to take that next step immediately, ensure that at least one of your consideration resources is something that isn't another social media post that hasn't dropped yet. Direct them to a video or a blog post or a PDF resource that you have available somewhere else. Well, after a week or two, then begin to roll out that consideration content on social media. This might help those who follow you but didn't necessarily click through the first time see it and click through now. If you ran Facebook ads the first time and you actually had decent engagement, consider running ads that retarget those who engaged with your ad the first time. Again, ensure your next step is available, and then a week or so later, roll out that decision phase content. Now, if that seems a little complex, no worries. You can post a mix of all three all the time. People who are at each stage of the journey will naturally discern for themselves whether a post is relevant for them or not. However, I would recommend posting a higher percentage of awareness material, a medium amount of consideration material, and the lowest proportion of decision content. That's because awareness is the easiest entry point, and so it'll be relevant to a higher proportion of people. And also, if you've structured those calls to action properly, the process can largely guide itself if someone really connects with that intro material. Well, now, listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you mapped out what the engagement journey looks like for your community? Are there steps that you find yourself more naturally creating content for and other steps you just sort of forget? Email us at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your thoughts or recommendations on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions you have for the show. We always love hearing from you. And as always, the easiest way to support this show and help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever service you're listening to right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.